Alan Rusbridger. Welcome to 7:30.
Hiya.
Now, were these very significant resignations from Deborah Turness and the Director General of the BBC really the consequence of a poor edit of a programme about Donald Trump that went to air some time ago?
Well, the poor edit, and it was a bad mistake, was used by people within the BBC and externally as a stick with which to beat the BBC, and to suggest that the BBC has bigger problems of what the critics call institutional bias against the right and against Donald Trump. So it was an excuse to criticize a director general who was already slightly beleaguered. And I think he came to the conclusion over the weekend that it was simply not worth fighting on.
And in the case of Deborah Turness, she holds a powerful position in the organisation. Again, in normal circumstances, you would expect an apology about this edit, which linked together two parts of Donald Trump's speech, but didn't materially misrepresent the tone of that speech. Again, the question is, why would that lead to the resignation of such a powerful figure? What's going on, as well as the argument over the edit of that speech?
Well, I think there had been a series of mishaps. I mean, the BBC puts out something like 23,000 hours of content over the course of a year, and there are bound to be mistakes. But the critics of the BBC have stitched together those mistakes. There was the Glastonbury Act, which was critical of Gaza, of what was happening in the IDF. There was a documentary which was voiced by the son of a Hamas official. So you can see how people who don't like public service broadcasting very much could put all those together and demand that heads should roll. And maybe Deborah Turness also felt that actually life was too short to have that constant stream of criticism.
And can you just tell us how this criticism has been working through the BBC? Now, I understand we've heard that there was a dossier put together by someone at the BBC looking at its impartiality, came to a very negative conclusion about that. Now, was that a legitimate piece of work? Who was behind it? And what was the purpose of putting that information together before it was leaked to the British Daily Telegraph?
Well, I think the governance arrangements of the BBC are odd. The main board has very few people who have any experience of 21st century journalism. And so there's a tiny committee, three of whom are insiders and a couple of whom are outsiders. And the feeling within the BBC is that one of the outsiders, who was a political appointee, was appointed by the Boris Johnson government and was a spin doctor for the Conservative Party, has been leading the agitation against the current management. Whether that's true or not, or how true that is difficult to tell. But the BBC journalists feel strongly that they were ready to come out and apologise for the bad edit in this programme a week ago, and that the BBC board refused to allow them to do so.
So what you're saying is they were prevented from what would be the normal run of events after a mistake. You know, it's a very serious mistake. There's no question about that. But so who benefits from this? To understand the kind of bigger narrative of what's going on here, you refer to poor governance in the BBC. But from our perspective, I think we're interested to know if we are looking at a bigger narrative that is aimed at public broadcasting as a concept in the United Kingdom.
Well, there's this curious arrangement by which the BBC has a royal charter, and that has to be renewed every 10 years. That's coming up for renewal. There's the argument that you'll be familiar with about how a public service broadcaster should be funded, whether through license fee or other means. So all this is only 2 years out, and 3 years out, 3.5 years out, there's the possibility that a Nigel Farage, a populist right-wing government, would get in. And the lesson from populist right-wing governments around the world is that the first thing they do is to target public service broadcasting. Donald Trump has done his own to direct public service broadcasting in the US. So the danger is that the turmoil that the BBC has been landed in just at this moment, when they're trying to get their act together to put themselves on a solid footing, it's going to be a very choppy couple of years, I fear.
And you mentioned Boris Johnson before. I understand that Michael Prescott, who put the dossier together, he was a spin doctor, you say, but he worked for Theresa May. Is
No,
Boris Johnson...
that was
Robbie Gibbs,
That
I
was
beg
Robbie
your pardon.
Gibbs.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah.
But Boris Johnson, so we've got a member of that committee who worked for Theresa May, but in this instance, is Boris Johnson playing a role in this? How is the politics breaking down in the United Kingdom?
Well, Boris Johnson at the weekend wrote a rather silly piece, I think, saying that he refused to pay the license fee until Tim Davie said something or quit. I mean, Boris Johnson, notorious when he was a journalist. He had to resign from the Times because he lied about something. His reporting from Brussels was a byword for exaggeration and sloppiness. Anyway, he's suddenly set himself up as the arbiter of what the BBC should be like, which and some of the commentary around this, claiming that the BBC is 100% untrue, as Donald Trump's press secretary said, is just silly. It's a highly respected and professional organization. But you can see in the way that people are exploiting this mistake, the BBC has only itself to blame for the mistake, shows you the agenda of some of the people who are trying to exploit this.
You're, as always, Alan Rusbridger, the master of understatement. Just explain how the involvement of Donald Trump in this story plays out in the United Kingdom. Is his involvement this crazy figure that he's raised in terms of suing the BBC? That's obviously a nonsensical figure, but the notion that he wants to sue the BBC, is that being welcomed amongst those enemies of the BBC in the United Kingdom, or is that just a bridge too far for the Brits to have an American president saying, I'm coming after your broadcaster?
Well, 2 points. I mean, one, I think people will rally behind the BBC because Donald Trump, they realize, has a loose relationship with the truth. But I think the BBC can play this to their advantage. They should not, in my view, settle. Donald Trump is suing the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, ABC, CBS. He's even suing the Pulitzer Prizes for giving the prize to somebody he didn't approve of. Now, unless somebody can prove that this editing was done with malice, the BBC has an absolute defense in the US because the US has much more restrictive libel laws than elsewhere, certainly when you're writing about public figures. So I hope the BBC can do what ABC and CBS didn't do, which was to cave and say, we'll see you in court. And that would be a way of retrieving something from this unfortunate episode.
Unfortunate episode. We're obviously, as a public broadcaster, watching closely. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Alan, especially at short notice. Thank you very much.